Okay, and we're back, and it's COMP2068, and it's week 6, lesson 6, part 1. And we're talking about our slot machine assignment number 2 project and how we can use it, how we can kind of build it together here. So I'm going to pull up, if I can, I don't know if I have it on my quick list here. I may or may not have it. I don't. I'm just going to pull up my, and again, we can follow in from where we left off last week. If you weren't following along, or somehow you've lost your the stuff that we were doing last week, here it is. You can certainly go online and pull it down from GitHub if you want to follow where I left off. Like, let's say, for example, you haven't done what I did, and you want to follow along with me. You can certainly go to my GitHub repository, and then from there, kind of search out your class, COMP2068, and if you notice there's slot machine demo, and this is the one that I'm going to be continuing on, right? So there's a few commits I've done, and I'm at the stage now where you can certainly download this thing if you wanted to use it and incorporate it into your own, or fork it if you want to fork this. Some of you have already done it, and you can use this in your as kind of a demo that we continue with today. Okay, so last we left off, we had a couple of things. We had our images for the background. We have our game.ts file and so on. I have a graphic coordinates XLS file that I use for my coordinates. I have my assets. I don't have any audio. I have stuff in images right now where I put my background and my buttons. I also have this blue button, which I'm going to get rid of. It's kind of a holdover from our base project. But when I run this thing, if I've done everything correctly right now, and I haven't modified it since we got together last, it looks like this, right? So if I click the button, if I hover over the button, I don't get a hover effect because remember we talked about before, as I have to modify the image to get that hover effect. But if I click the spin button, so here's my JavaScript console, right? If you notice my effect is working. What it's supposed to do is actually hover over and change what it's supposed to do. So that piece, the functionality is going there, right? But I don't see the effect because my graphic in the background has all these things. So the only thing I'm going to do for today from a graphic perspective is get rid of the buttons from my graphic. I don't need that anymore, right? So let's do that. So I'm going to go back to over here, and I have them, of course, in a document, in a downloads document that I have kind of slot machine that I kind of put together for you guys, and I have images, and inside there I have my background image. I'm going to just load right here, and I'm going to do some quick fix. I'm going to do a couple things here. I'm going to create my slot, my actual images that go in here, right? My my placeholder images, and I'm also going to just clean this up so we can see some of the effects that I want to work, right? Because that's kind of where we left off. So I'm just going to zoom in here with Fireworks. And again, just to remind you, Fireworks is a deprecated piece of software. It's not something that they're going to continue to support on the Adobe side at all. But that doesn't mean by any means that you can't use something that's like this. I'm using it because, hey, I feel comfortable using it, right? So, and for you, I'd ask you to do the same thing, right? I'm going to ask you to grab something that makes sense for you and then use that, right? Don't try and, for you to learn something new, that's a great thing. I respect that. I really do. But you may not just have the time to do that, right? So just, think of it that way. I think what you want to try and do is you want to make the best use of your time, right? And part of the best uses, so to speak, is kind of decide, which pieces I can. If I was a student, I would say, well, how much time do I have to spend on this stuff? I'm not a graphic artist. I just got to make things go so it looks passable. It doesn't have to be perfect. Like, even though the assignment says I want you to make your own slot machine, my expectations are fairly low. Like, I don't expect you to come up with perfect graphics because we're not in a graphic manipulation class. This isn't the point of this exercise here. The point is I'm going to take some graphic assets and do things with them, make them interactive and animate them and those kind of things. That's what I really want to do with this thing, right? So, let's use that context when we think about things so that we don't get carried away. Like, if you spend hours and hours doing graphic manipulation, this is a bad thing, right? Because that's not what I want you to do. That goes out of scope for me, you know, in terms of how things should be. So, any questions around that? I know it's kind of funky when I say that stuff. Some people don't like it. They're like, well, "What do you mean by that? You don't care about our graphic images?" It's not that I don't care. It's just that I can't give you so much. I can't spend so much time talking about graphics because it's not a graphic class. We're doing advanced web programming, right? And the advanced web programming tack I'm taking is, let's create an interactive UI, right? We're going to make games with it, but it doesn't mean that once you learn these skills, you're learning TypeScript, you're learning how to use Visual Studio as an IDE, you're learning how to do some interactivity. These same skills are transferable that you can use for other projects, not just game projects. Okay, so I've cleaned up my background, right? So I've taken away those button images, I think fairly well. So that way I can see my glow a little bit better. I'm just going to kind of save that. And I'm going to kind of transfer it back in here because that's one of the issues I have. My current graphic, if I go into downloads, and if I look at my current graphic for Slot Machine, I have my old Slot Machine image, which is the one that is here, right? My background image. And I need to replace it now with the one I just modified. And that's what I've just done as I was speaking to you. Oh, by the way, do you notice how I can't do this right now? Why can't I do this right now? Why can't I transfer things over right now? Why isn't it saying, no, you can't? Huh? I'm in debugging mode. So if you haven't figured that out, you might notice you're like, Tom, I don't know how to transfer stuff over. Well, it's because you're in debugging mode. So you have to stop debugging, right? That'll allow you to do some image transfer like this, right? And what it allows you to do is kind of replace it, and I say yes, and then when I go back to my images, if I refresh, it'll show me my new image, right? But you see, I'm stopped debugging, so I have to restart kind of debugging again, right? Okay, so this is my new one, right? And if you notice, let me just refresh here. There, see, I only have this image here, this spin button. Now you can actually see the difference because before it was overlaid on top of my other images, right? Now I got to put my other images back, but for now, I'm not going to put the buttons. You guys can put the buttons on your own, right? What I want to do here is when I click this spin button, I want the images to spin up here. I don't care about money. I don't care about anything. I just want the images to kind of pop up. That's my job today, right? So how do I do that? Well, first I need the images. So these three things, I need them, right? I need a bunch of different things, a bunch of images. And you know where I can get them from? Well, right here, right? So there's some design decisions I have to make, right? So here's my Slot Machine graphic, and here are my three rectangles, right, that I'm going to use. If you are choosing, and here's something that Rob actually asked me this just now. If you're choosing to do some kind of animation, right, then you may want to think about making each of these reels, each of these things here, their own container, right? And then what you do is in that container, you can use something called masking, right? So that you only show the space in the container that you want to show, and everything else outside of that mask is hidden, right? So what you can do is actually pass the animation into that space as if it's animation. So it's just all you're doing is moving. You're just moving images into the viewport, if you will, each of these little viewports. And you're only showing those things as opposed to trying to figure out how to animate in other ways. That's the way to do it with masking. Masking is the trick here, right? Now, if you're not going to animate, and that's outside of the scope of what you can do with the time you're given, right? Don't worry about it, right? It's not important. You don't have to do that. What you could do instead is just at the beginning, what I'd ask you to do is flash the images up here. So from a design decision perspective, how big do I want to make my images based on the image that you see here, right? How big do I want to make each of my images? That's the first thing, all right? So let's do some measuring. So I think I want to make them at least square, not rectangular like this, right? So if I look at it, and if I zoom in on one of these reels, so here's the reel, I'm going to zoom right in, right? One of these things here. If I measure it just from the top, you know, and again my pointer is also dark, so it's going to be hard. It's a rough estimate is my width is 85 and my height is 105, right? So my width is probably, being 85 or so is probably right. I think that's kind of where I want to go. I'm just going to make it one more time so that's accurate. There we go. So 84 and 104 is approximately the width of my rectangle. All right. So what's the strategy? What would you guys do? If I was going to make an image, I want it to be in the middle. I need to size my image properly, right? What size would I make it? Anybody have an idea? You guys are going to make these design decisions, right? This is your game. So what would you do? I have my window size for each of my reels is 84 width, pixels wise, and 104 height. What would I do? You tell me. You're designing it. 80 by 100. That means that I want a square one, right? So what's the maximum size it could possibly be if I make it square? 84, actually. 84 by 84. If you leave padding, what's the good thing and bad thing about leaving padding? There's a good thing and bad thing about it. If I leave padding, that means around here, this image has to be pretty much white, everything around. Or otherwise, if it comes out with any kind of edges or a border or something, it'll kind of look weird, right? So if I don't leave padding, I got to be careful too, because that means I could override the border that I got going on here.
Well, no, I mean, like, if I had the size of my image smaller than my actual what I'm working with,
yep.
I'd still go up even.
Okay, 80, you're saying. 80 by 80, would that be sufficient? Okay, let's do that. So let us design a square, right? I'm going to kind of pull into here. I'll make it 80 by 80. I'm just going to draw it roughly right now. There's my square. And I'm going to change this, my height and width, to be the exact same. I can do that here by controlling my height and width. There's 80 by 80. This is what it looks like, 80 by 80, right? And this is what I'm positioning it here with a border. I'm going to take the border away. Is this good for you? Think about this. If you're going to animate, right, I don't recommend this size. Why don't I recommend this size? Because if you make it this size, right, I want to have part of my object up here and part of my object showing down here for realism, right? So this is too big if I was going to do it, if I was going to think about animating. If I'm not thinking about animation, then who cares? This is fine, right? So I'm just saying, this is just design considerations when you make your game, right? And you got to plan ahead before I have a real image. This is the way to do it, right? Get a placeholder in there, design your placeholder, put some words in there like cherry or whatever it's going to be. That's what I'm going to do right now. And then have that image show up in the exact position that I want as a placeholder. Okay, so 80 by 80, I mean, here's the disadvantage. You see this little border on one side and the other? That's an issue for me, right? I could make it 84. I could make it a different shape. I could make it rectangular. The challenge is, if I make it rectangular, I have to understand that my upper border, that there's going to be a padding on each side of my image. It's not going to span the whole length of my image, right? So let's try that instead. So I want to make it square. It's not going to work square, right? Not if I want to animate it or plan for animation. So my next stage is to go, well, what if I made it, instead of 80 long, I still made it 80 wide, but height-wise I only made it 60. So let's go 60 for height. And let's center it. Now, good thing about, oops. Let me just lock that. I'm just going to lock the layer behind. Sorry, lock the layer behind, so I can just move this one. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to roughly put it in the middle so I can see how that is. So that looks a little better, but I know that this image, even though it's 80 wide or whatever, I'm not going to really have an image that's quite 80 wide. It's going to be, there's going to be some padding on either side because I want my image in the middle to be square, right? So this is the border of my image. I'm gonna actually put a border that's for us because we're just using it as a placeholder image. That's all I'm doing right now. My placeholder image is going to have a border. Instead of it being a solid stroke, right, as an example, I want to make it so that my stroke, my edge, is dotted, right? So there's different options for that here. For example, I can choose my edges and my, I'm going to pull this up. So here's a basic dashed, right, and see if there's a basic dashed image. Right, and I can choose the kind of dashing I want, a dotted dash, right? So that's what my border is going to look like. So this is approximately the size of my the actual size of my image, right? And then inside, I want to draw what my image will look like physically inside. So now I know I have 80 width and 60 height. So I want to kind of make it at least, let's say, 50 by 50, because that'll fit within both, right? Because I want to make it a squarish image. So here's 50 by 50, right? I'll make it the way it is. So just so you guys understand what I'm doing, I'll make this one solid. So this is the, or would you be satisfied, here's my question, would you be satisfied with this as the inner image and this as the padding around it, right? So this is the design consideration you have to make. Let's make the inner one solid. Right, there's my solid image. This is where my image is going to be. And inside there, for this first image, I want to design my text. I want to put my text in there. And it's going to be like blank. That's my first text. So blank. It's too big. And I'm going to go down to like a 10. Someone's banging. So that's my blank. That's what's going to come up with my blank. So my blank is going to come in there and it's going to go flash, and it's going to be in there. Now this gives me enough room. If you notice, there's a bit of space up here for my next image, and a bit of space up there for my bottom image if I choose to animate. So this 50 by 50 is probably the rough estimate of where I want my image to be, which means if I download an image for the internet, the actual image itself, the banana, the cherry, whatever, I have to resize and reformat or whatever, so it's 50 by 50. If I download anything else, it won't work with my scheme. That's why I do this. That's why I start sizing and placeholding now. Okay? I also should know a couple things. Where do I want this bloody whole thing to be? So I'm just going to kind of surround this thing and make it kind of grouped. So it's one image now. I kind of make it whatever I like. So we'll just call this the our tile. That's really what it is. So here's our tile, and the tile that we're going to use, I want to make it so it's kind of in the middle. Right now, from an X and Y coordinate perspective, right? And again, we saw that it was 84 by 104, right? So if I want to center this thing inside of here, and for my first one, I've got to make it so that it sits properly. So let's take a look at the outer side here. Let's kind of go here. Oh, that's not right. And again, bear with me because I'm working on a small screen, and what you're seeing is me trying to manipulate here far away as I'm standing up. All right, so 84 by 104, but the actual slots are at 57 and 165. Now let me see if did I include that in my Excel document for my graphic coordinates, because I should have put that in there, and if I don't have it in there, I should, right? So here's real one, 57 by 105. I kind of made it 185 by 105. It's really 85 by 104, but that's okay. It's off by one pixel. So that's what these things are right here. And the other thing I need to know is for my real 1, 2, and 3, if it's roughly 85 by 105 and it's 57 by 165, where is my first image gonna pop up, right? Well, let's go back. What's the center? How do I find the center of between 57 and I got to add 85 width to it, like the edges of my document, if you will. So let's go back. I got to do some calculations here. So here's my image, right? Here's my image right here. And if you notice, right, it's at 57 and 165. Let me see if did I copy that? Did I do that right? I did that correct. That's good. Just making some checks. All right. And what I got to do here is I got to say, well, if this is 57, and it doesn't automatically do it for me. I can't just drag and drop this thing. I can't just go and roughly put it in there. It won't do it for me right away, right? It'll try and center it for me as best as possible, right, based on the center. But I've got to really kind of figure out for myself, centering-wise, where it should be and where I want it, right? So roughly, my height and width is the same, but it's 58 by 187. I got to decide. I got to make a design decision again. So where do I want this thing? I want it centered roughly. This looks about right. This is too right to the left. This is too high. This is too low, right? Might be between here and here, 188 and 189, right? How do I figure that out exactly? Well, I know that this thing here, right, what the width of this thing is, right? I have it here in my Excel document, right? My total height, right, for my height is 105, right? So if I divide my height, if I take my height, 105, right, And now I want to think about the actual height of my new image, which I'm going to start recording here, right? I need to do this one time. So here's my height of my image. My height of my image is 60. All right, that's cool, 60. And it's 80 by 60 is my image. So I'm going to go here and go, oops, go to my Excel document and start writing this down. So each image, or if you want to call it tiles, are, I don't know the thing, but I know that they're 80 wide by 60 high. That's what I know what they are. That's the actual tile size, right? Tile height, if you will. I'll center that a little bit. 80 by 60, right? And I know that inside my start X and start Y for the first tile, so tile 1, right, inside my real one, if my real one is 57 by 165, right, and it's 80 by 60, and the real itself is 85 by 105, I know that I have, from a width perspective, 5 pixels, so I'm pretty much centered as it is. From a height perspective, I got 40 pixels, 42 pixels, let's say, on each side. So at least you got to go down 42 pixels from the top of my starting position. So I say 165, which is the top, right? 165 plus 42, because I'm calculating my total pixels. So I should really start my first tile around 207. Let's see if that's correct. Oops. So is it 207? And my Y is 189, which isn't correct. So I've kind of miscalculated somehow, right? So I'm kind of saying if my whole tile is height is 60, and I'm subtracting it from the total height of my real. Did I do that correctly? My total height of my real is 105, right? 105 minus 60, right, is again 42. 45 divided by 2 is 22 and a half. 22 and a half, if I start 165 from my height, from my start Y position, right, then I add 22 and a half, right, so again, that's what I did. I did 42, 42 and a half, that's why it's not correct. It's 22.5. Then it should be roughly 187.5, and that's closer to what I have. Again, I got to do this one time, and once I've got this done, so I'm at 189, right? 187.5, so maybe 188 might be the right position for me to be completely roughly centered, so it looks perfect in my screen. I can type it in here or whatever. It looks like my 59 is accurate for my X position. It looks like right, 59 by 188. So that's the first tile. So tile one is going to be 59 start X by 188. Now 188 is not going to change. That's always going to be the same, right? It's just my X location that's going to change now, right? And I need my Excel spreadsheet to kind of, before I go into my program, I need to know where they go. I can't just randomly put them. It won't look right. Or else I'm going to do things like trial and error when I'm programming. That's bad. There's no trial and error here, guys. This is very accurate, placement of absolute positioning, right? And in a video game, I'm sorry to tell you this, but there's more absolute positioning out there than anything else. Trying to do things with layout and all that kind of stuff, it's very rare unless you're doing something with mobile that you're going to resize the whole thing. But it's a lot of times it's absolute positioning. Okay, let's try this. So this is my first tile. We don't know what that is. Here's my second tile. Here's my third tile. We know that the tile sizes aren't going to change size. We know that it's going to be in my real. I just need to figure out my X coordinates for the other two. So let's go back to fireworks. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this real, this tile here, and I'm just going to move it so it positions roughly over the other one. And I'm going to record the results. Now I've got my blank. Once I got this blank, I can make all my other ones, right? That looks about right. So that looks like my X coordinate is 164. Okay? See what I did there? I just slid it over. So 164, right? And my last one, right? And again, you might say, well, this is easy, Tom. I understand what you're doing here. Why are we going through this? Because guys, this is what, when you first start off, this is all the crazy work you have to do. If you've never seen it before, if I haven't shown it to you, or if someone hasn't seen it, then maybe you don't know what to do, right? And that's 269. And all I'm doing is I'm reading the values, right? that's inside my program. Okay, I've got my tile positioning. I've got an example tile. I'm going to go back now. Let me save this thing because I'm going to need it. I'm going to go back to my program here. My background is what I'm looking at right now, but I don't need my background. I just need this tile now. So I'm going to kind of copy or exit. So cut it, create a new image size, paste it, get rid of this. This is the actual size, right, of what it's going to look like. It's going to be pretty small because that's the size of my actual slot machine has smaller slots or smaller reels. Okay, and here's where I'm going to do all my fixing. So this is my blank. I'm going to go File, Save As, and I'm going to set. This is my first tile, so I'm going to call this blank, lowercase, blank, ping. Why am I doing lowercase? I want to try and match up what it says in my string to what it says here, because I'm going to create my string value for my path. My path is going to be a relative path, right? And I want to be able to go to my path and say, go to Assets and load this image. And it's going to be random depending on what I need. Okay? So blank is one of them. Okay, I want to kind of go in here and change what it says in here. So I'm going to kind of ungroup if I can. And this is instead of blank, I want it to say, again, I think it's banana, right? Banana. And if you notice, I have to center this thing a little bit. There's my banana, File, Save As. And I know that there's a bar, right, and a 7. Oop. I guess I'm just using the smart guides here to do this. You can do this by more accurate means if you need to. Save as bar, and we'll do 7, right? And this is what it would normally be if you were going to get the actual images going, right? 7. Which is rare. And I can't remember the other one, so let's go back and look at my code. Now my code I got from, I'm gonna kind of, this is where I'm gonna meld my two code pieces together, and I'm gonna kind of grab stuff from my example code, which is the slot machine kind of example that I have down here that you can find on GitHub. This is what we're going to wire up together. Here's slot machine, the first version of it. And if I go in here, I can open this up as like my JavaScript piece. I only have a main and a jQuery JS. The main JS is really what I want. I'm going to open this up with Sublime. You can open it up with your favorite text editor. And in here I can see all of my code that I need to include. So blank, grapes, banana, I did banana. And see how the blank is up lowercase and my grapes is uppercase. I need to fix this in my code because that can't be. Everything has to be the same, either uppercase or lowercase. I gotta adopt one thing. So that's one thing I need to do is change my code a little bit, right? So grapes, orange, cherry, grapes, orange, cherry, and bell. So grapes. File, save as. Orange. It's almost perfect as it is, but let's just realign it a little bit. File, save as. Grapes, orange, cherry, right? And bell. So if you're following along, right, try and do what I'm doing. You should create your own stand-ins, if you will, placeholders, right? Because if you don't, when you download stuff from the internet, it might appear skewed, it might not look right, it might be too small, it might be too big, you know, whatever. So I've kind of created my stand-ins, and we'll go bell. Okay, I think I got them all. Let me just make sure. So grapes, banana, orange, cherry, bar, bell, 7. Yep. I got them all. Okay, cool. So that's the first piece that I've got going on. Now I've got to transfer those things. I'm probably not going to do any more work on the graphics today, right? So I'm going to kind of close out Fireworks or your favorite program or whatever it's going to be. I need this because I need to position these things programmatically, so I'll leave that up. And this piece I'm going to need because when I do this, I want to be able to grab this code, right, and incorporate it into my code. This is existing code that I know works because I use it. This is my first version. This is my code base. So I want to use this stuff to calculate stuff. I may bring in this code as is and modify some things, some small things, right? Okay, this is cool. I need to go into my downloads again, and I need to go into that space where I have my slot machine, which is right here. Here's my slot machine assets. Here's my images. And did I put them in the wrong place? Or did I put those things? That would be bad. I put them on the other side. I did. Doesn't matter. I'm going to pull them in now into my code. And for you guys, the great thing is you can, if you don't want to, you can use my stand-ins to follow along, right? So I'm going to sync up with GitHub in a second once I do this, right? So instead of you having to download and do all this graphic work yourself, it's there, right? So you don't have to, do that on your own, right? I just want to do it with you so you see how I did it, and you're going to have to probably do the same thing because for some of this stuff, it's not going to work out for you. I'm just going to kind of pull this into my images, and then so that way I have all the images that I need. Blank, cherry, grapes. If you notice, my assets are growing, right? Because I need to include all these little assets in here. And you're going to say, well, hold on, Tom. Can't you use a Sprite sheet? Yes, we can. And we can do that. And if we get around to it today, I'll see if we can do something like that. Use a Sprite sheet instead of using individual images. And there's advantages to this, right? If I load individual images, I'm loading them up every time, right? I'm accessing my hard drive every single time I need an image, right? I could preload them all, right? Like, so I could say, preload all these images, right? And once I load them all, once I preload everything, then I can use them, right? So I can use the image. The challenge is that I need to take this image, copy it somehow from the stuff that I've loaded. I have a placeholder, someplace, a position that I'm holding the image. Take my image somewhere in code, and then copy it into the tile when I need to. Basically, I'm going to show the tile over and over again a bunch of times, right? Almost like I'm going to create new objects over and over again. That's whacked. That's crazy for me to create a new object over and over again. It's almost like I'm going to create my own objects and throw them in there. And I can make as many buttons of the same class as I want. I can make a button. Once I define my button, that's how it's an object, I can make copies of the button, right? How many copies am I going to make, right? I need to make 7 copies for each slot. Doesn't make sense. I need to change the image. That's what I need to do. In order for me to change the image, I'm loading the image every time I press the button. That's ineffective, inefficient. We need to go to another model, right? But for now, let's see if it works just like we're doing it, and then we'll move to the next piece. Okay, so we've got our images that I want, banana bar, right? If I hover over it, these are our stand-ins, right? And what I want to do now is I want to incorporate some of my code so that it works with what I'm doing. So for now, just before I end this movie off, I'm going to go into change and make sure that I've got all this stuff. I'm changing my background. I added 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So 8 more images. I got rid of this blue button, right, which is about right. And I don't have any excluded files. That's one thing you have to check. And there's a couple of untracked files. So be careful when you do your update. See if you notice, I'm not tracking game.js and the map, which sometimes you need up there. So I want that. So I'm going to include them. I can just click Add All for untracked files. And what that'll do is it'll add it to my list of files I'm going to send up to GitHub. So I'm going to say added tile assets, tile image assets, right? And they're tile image placeholder assets. Because that's what they are, right? Commit. It's going to ask me to save that, and then you guys should have access to that. And I go to unsync commits and click sync. right? You guys should have access to that in a second. Let me see. Whenever our lovely internet chooses to, connect. Okay, while this is going, I'm going to go back into my code. It's taking a long time to do this for some reason or another. I am connected. I'm seeing a connection here, so it must be something going on with our internet. It might time out, and if it does, I'm going to have to do it later. Right? Okay, so I've got this code that I've got going on, and right now my only function that I have is I got my container, and it's positioned kind of in the middle of my stage. I've added my stage here. I create my UI here, and its own method. What's a detailed message? An error occurred while sending the request. Yeah, because guess what? There's no. There we go. That's done. Okay, the internet was faulty for a second. Okay, you should have it up online now on GitHub if you guys are following along. Okay, so I've got my create UI method, and the only thing I have in here is a button that when I hover over it, right, it does all this clicking and stuff like this. Right now I have my mouse out, my mouse over, and my my spin button clicked. Well, this is in my spin reels function is where I want to do my spinning, right? I have a function already that I've already done from my base code that I gave you guys. So this is the first thing I want to make. When I click on my spin button, I want that to do stuff, and I'm going to do that in the next movie.